Good morning, everyone. Welcome back in. Betsperts Golf here for our first look at the 2025 Arnold Palmer Invitational. Bay Hill, busy week for golf. Live golf here. Obviously, second, we have Puerto Rico as well. So a busy week. We're going to focus in this morning on signature event here at the Arnold Palmer Invitational, as we said. Hopefully, Ron, they don't bastardize Bay Hill like they did a little bit again last week at PGA National. Again, it got some teeth over the weekend. We just had such soft conditions on Thursday. It's one of those scenarios where it was almost like LACC a couple years ago where, everyone was so mentally warped from what happened in the first round when like Xander and Ricky went out and, set course records or, US Open records. And then eventually, we kind of came to the same winning scores we would have at a typical event, still a little bit higher, and just a definitely interesting tournament. So hopefully we don't have the same at Bay Hill. What's going on, buddy?
Yeah, so, we had rain early in the week last week to start with on Monday. And then, I just did not expect, the ryegrass and the fairways to make that much of a difference. But apparently, all the players kind of confirmed that. And, you saw, I don't know what, the first, second, and third rounds were the lowest scoring in the entire decade at PGA National. So, and then, of course, you have the whole par 5 change from last year. And, the wind never really, kind of a little bit here and there, but the wind never really impacted much. So, yeah, I had really high hopes for yesterday. We had 34 players within 6 shots of the lead. And so, congrats to Joe Highsmith. But again, he kind of, there was no drama really. I was even hoping for even something like, I know we both had Russell Henley. We probably were both prepared to be disappointed and rooting for him. But I was, and maybe at least give me like a 5-person playoff or something, but he kind of pulled away there a little bit at the end. And so, yeah, Joe Highsmith, Bridgman, Spawn, leaderboard, fun times.
Tough. Yeah. No, the Russell Henley thing was an experience I've had before. That was kind of part of the handicap though, is like betting all outrights. And I focus on that more than you do. Really, all I want is basically a chip in a chair on Sunday, right? Like I want to have a runner. I want to have a shot. And I had a pretty good feeling that Russell Henley was going to give me a shot at the top. And that's kind of the nature of outright golf betting. Continue to be there. Really haven't had no sweat on a Sunday all year, which is a great feeling, getting over the finish line a couple of times, but, having a chance is what we need. You grabbed the share of the lead there, kind of right around the turn, then gave a few back. And, as that stretch of holes can do there, towards the tail end of the front 9 and around the turn. But yeah, it was very interesting to see. I thought he was going to be a very sneaky player this week for Puerto Rico. And now he's, in the API fields, and who knows what to make of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico odds are kind of crawling out. We'll have more Puerto Rico thoughts as the week goes on at Betsperts Golf. This morning, we don't have a lot because we just don't have the odds board. And we're going to focus on the signature event field when we have all the big dogs here at API. And again, Bay Hill, typically, at least one of the, more difficult tests on the PGA Tour historically, is becoming increasingly rare where we have the, I guess, even chance of having a single digit winner in terms of under par. So this is still at least one of those, a chance. Again, now Scotty got to 15 last year. So like we are very much still can be in the low teens here. I don't think we're getting to 20 at Bay Hill. That would be definitely a shift from where we've been in the past, but we have some course nuggets that make us a little bit nervous, something that Ron found today that does not align with where we've been historically here, which means we could be in for a scenario where we are maybe in the upper teens. But let's look quickly at the field before we get into some of the course stuff. Lines here, courtesy of FanDuel this morning. It's good to see Xander Schauffele back in the field. Let me do this one. This is better. We'll get us out of the way. We don't want us at all. You see Scotty here. And again, shop around, obviously, on a Monday morning. These odds are shifting and look different in different places. You could probably find Scotty, I believe, at 350 in some spots. He has won 2 of the last 3 here. With the Kurt Kitayama mixed in the middle there. Rory, 750. There are some bigger numbers out there in the marketplace on Rory as well, but I think decent number there. Again, excellent course history here as well. Ludwig coming off of the win, obviously at Torrey Pines Genesis version. Xander back in the fields. We haven't seen Xander for a little bit. So good to see him back here. Obviously, a little discount relative to where we would see Xander typically if he had been playing. So some of the questions and concerns baked into the number here at 16. I think fairly confidently if Xander was playing normal Xander golf and has been playing regularly, this would be a single-digit number on Xander or maybe 10. But I think he'd be kind of right there in the mix. So that's baked in a little bit. Colin, Hideki, JT, Patrick Cantley, Tommy Fleetwood. You can see strong fields in terms of real win equity at the top. It feels like it drops off pretty fast based off of what we've seen here historically and how both Scotty and Rory are shaping up right now. But obviously you're going to get some bigger numbers down the board on some guys you typically pay significantly shorter prices on if you have a lean here, and we kind of dig through and find some numbers here as well. So again, in these small fields, Ron, where it is a cut event, it is 50 in ties. It's similar to what we had at Torrey Pines Genesis, right? Where we have these invitationals, top 50 in ties within 10 strokes of the lead as well. So depending on where the scoring gets. So it is a cut event compared to the other signature events where some of those are obviously non-cut events. So, let's get into the course, Ron. I mean, you could share some of the notes that you had, some of the stuff that you maybe find to be a little bit alarming that we've seen here this morning, but obviously a difficult test, typically healthy 7,400 and change from the tips, and typically plays longer than the scorecard indicates, but let's see if that holds up.
Yeah, one of the best overall tests of skill on the PGA Tour. If you look at the past winners here, very accomplished group of winners. Kind of a couple things about that, kind of an international flair. We've got a lot of Americans winning the last few years, but even going back, you've got, Jason Day, Mark Leishman, obviously Rory's won here, Molinari, Ty Hatton, even Kurt Kitayama, had a lot of DP World Tour experience. So he's played all over. So that's interesting. A lot of really good off the tee players. I think that's something that's going to be a huge focus this week. Like you said, longer course, over 7,400 yards, second toughest non-major over the last 5 years. So we've got, high missed fairway penalty, 33% of approaches, over 200 yards, fast Bermuda greens. Like all Florida courses, we've got 9 holes with water danger. And this is the thing that I saw. And again, I haven't heard much about this yet, but on the official publication here for the agronomy this week, it says that the rough is only going to be 3 inches, and typically it's listed as between 4 and 5 inches. So again, who knows what that is? Maybe it's a typo. Let's hope it is, because I think we all want to see a much tougher test this week, especially with all these elite players here. And I think Bay Hill's tough enough where even if the rough was a little shorter, you're not going to see anything close to a birdie fest. Again, wind is another big thing here. I have to keep monitoring the forecast. It can wreak havoc here. That year when Hatton won at 4 under, I think there's only like 2 players even under par the whole week. So, yeah, I think just something to monitor and kind of maybe keep up, see what the reports are, as we lead into Thursday.
Yeah, that can get really complicated on the weekends. Obviously, when you have so much water in play, when you've had historically thick rough, and then you get these really, really fast, baked out Bermuda grass greens that also have to deal with the wind situation. I think you probably, at least in the past, noted that in your preview article, which is up on the site at Betsperts Golf, where these can get really fast on the weekend, right? So that's typically kind of what we want to see. We want to see these guys with the players on deck, starting to get into major championship season. We want to get into these tests that look a little bit different than the standard tour event. So something that looks very different than Puerto Rico, right? Or Hong Kong that we have this weekend on Live. So definitely a difficult test. We'll have to see if the rough, I guess just from a high level, let's just assume that the rough is the 3 inches. Like in terms of what you're doing handicapping wise, you're trying to rely a little bit on accuracy, combination of like distance from the edge of the fairway, driving accuracy, total driving vibe. How much would that change if we get confirmed 3 inches versus 5 inches from the rough? Like, is that going to impact? Are you going to give maybe a little less credence to that being an important skill?
I'd probably give a little less credence to the whole missed fairway penalty, accuracy, but there's so many forced layups here still off the tee that I don't think guys are going to really change their driver strategy a whole lot. You got a lot of water danger as well. So I think it will, minimize my fairways as far as how I look at that, just because obviously if it's not as penal. So I don't, it's just really hard because Bay Hill has always played the same way. And so, this would be a huge change if it's really 3 inches.
You can see here on our course stats page at Betsperts Golf, you can get all the details on the course here, some of the things that Ron is talking about. You can see here water danger on 9 holes is high. We have fast greens. And again, you'll probably have some variation of like 12.5 to like 14 on the weekend. So, kind of living in the middle there, but fast regardless either way. Again, we are Bermuda all over the place. You can see it is a spot where it is historically difficult to gain off the tee. You do have mixed off the tee club selection. So as Ron said, even though there's a lot of distance here, this is part of why it does play longer, because there are forced layups. It is not just a long course where you have to, hit driver and hopefully find the fairway consistently. There are going to be spots where you are forced to lay up here as well. Also similar to last week, at least what it had been historically at PGA National, it's also very difficult to gain on approach. So it is a very difficult ball striking week. That is what we want to see in terms of, test difficulty here. So you can see more information here along with some of the correlated courses. What you got, one?
And one change. So like last week, and I need to change this. But there is a rye overseed. So for the rough, so we'll make that change here on this look. But it definitely all Bermuda, but again with the overseed with the cooler air, it is ryegrass similar to last week. So
yeah, and that was again unique to what we typically have seen at PGA National as well. So just to see if they're starting to see some scary corollary situations to setups last week and stuff. So you can see historically how the holes have played if you want to go through that in terms of birdie, par, bogey, and worse rates here. Some of the stuff that Ron's talking about here is what you can see driving distance on average, a little bit lower than what we would typically see from a standard tour event, which is again part of why this place is tricky historically, because it is a little bit longer. Driving usage a tad below, you could see a lower rate of drives going 320 plus, and then accuracy, even though we're climbing down a little bit, we are finding the fairway at a slightly less frequency in terms of you're finding the short grass here. If you want to get into the specifics of where players miss, you can get all that here as well. Distance from the edge of the fairway, you can see here a little bit closer, so guys aren't missing by quite as much, but it is something that's going to matter quite a bit here as well. I also like to look at, typically when we run through this, just the approach shot distribution. We can see where guys are playing from. Fair mix. You can see here in terms of, where the breakdowns are because of some of the forced layups here. You do have some, gap wedges, some stuff like that. That's a little bit shorter depending on, who you are and how you play. But not anything that is drastically outlier in terms of tour event average until you get to the 200 plus. You can see here we are about 6% more 200 plus, just longer irons here. Historically 175 to 200 plus is a little bit more, but it's not like there's nothing from the shorter stuff here as well. Anything you want to highlight in terms of course metrics or anything here, Ron?
Yeah, no, just like you said, there are less wedges hit here, but it's not like drastically where you shouldn't factor wedge play at all. You still have your 4 par 5s. And yeah, another thing, this is kind of at least in the past, it always has been a high apex ball flight week because you have so many long irons and these greens have been so firm. And so that's why you see guys like Rory and Bryson, with so much success here, able to, really get, elevation. And so, get your ball to land a little softer on those firm greens. So I think that's another key rabbit hole thing for this week as well.
Hatton, Kurt Kitayama. Those are definitely things that they have in their game there as well. Again, you can go into some more specific stuff if you want to get into specifics of rough or fairway. All of this stuff is here for you in our course stat page. You want to get into some of the scoring ranges, putting, all that's here for you too. You can see here past leaderboards as I was touching on. You can see previous winning scores. Kitayama 9 under, Scotty at 5. Bryson got up to 11. This is the Hatton win year that you were talking about at 4 under. We're typically right around, you see that, nice year, no win with Rory going out and putting up a number. But it's not a spot where we typically see crazy numbers. You see Scotty pulled away there with a fantastic Sunday. Just kind of started the season of Scotty here last year at Bay Hill, and just kind of kept it rolling from there. But otherwise, pretty close. Some of these guys were very, very, very much in the mix until late in the day on Sunday, where it felt like Scheffler just unlocked the putter for the first time in a very long time, and it felt like there was a massive shift. What we were watching felt very different comparatively. So that continued, tended to be correct. That was definitely a thing. So, all right, let's jump into some rabbit hole stuff. You want to take a look at some course history specific stuff off the tee and talk to us about that while I bring it up here.
Yeah. So, obviously, if you have distance here at Bay Hill, even though not a ton of drivers, just kind of a mixed, if we're looking at, club type off the tee. But yeah, those guys who kind of have shown in the past that they've been more aggressive. Obviously a guy like Rory who, when we pull this up here, driving distance is only 284, he's still, 298. So I know there's not a ton of sample size when you kind of look at, the even last 5 years, but just to kind of get an idea, okay, who's still long off the tee here and who also has shown that they, have some accuracy here. So, I just think, as we kind of always do on these more difficult courses, with, kind of a high rough penalty, kind of looking at, whether it's, distance, total driving, distance from edge of the fairway. I think all three of those are, kind of worth a look here. And even on a course like Bay Hill, there is a pretty good deal of course history. A lot of these guys have been here a ton. Just interesting to kind of to view that.
Yeah, I believe you had a note in the past, and I guess it would continue. We have 16 of the past 19 winners had played the event at least 3 times. So there probably is something to just kind of kicking it around here before probably helps. I think there are definitely cases to be made. Ludwig seeing all these places for like the second time, right? And I think we feel like his game is suited for pretty much anywhere. But I think it's definitely a spot where experience matters here a little bit too. So yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely small sample in terms of rounds played. You made a good point when we were talking about this beforehand that, thinking even in terms of number of drives makes it a little bit more of a palatable thing, because I think it does speak to aggressiveness off the tee, which I think is a story that you're trying to tell through this lens. And I think it is smart, right? You're trying to get a sense of, okay, most guys are clubbing down a little bit. There are instances where they're forced to lay up, but when they have the chance to let it rip a little bit, who's still being really aggressive and who's really trying to make the most of those distance gains and distance advantages that they have, because, just, again, having a higher lofted wedge, holding these really fast greens, those things matter a ton here. You typically just see across the PGA Tour now, guys would much rather have 150 in from the first cut than 180 in at times from the fairway. Like, now there are instances where fairway over everything matters because you can control spin, but you're not really spinning it a bunch with, say, a 6 iron or a 5 iron, right? Even from the fairway, you'd rather have the higher lofted club and be able to, leave it a little short and let it run up there a little bit. So I do think there's something to be said for looking at driving distance, even though this is a smaller sample in terms of rounds played. Yeah.
And I would say these guys on the top of this list are very confident at Bay Hill and their approach off the tee. Rory's got 20 rounds, even Scotty there, even if you look at Scotty, distance from edge of the fairway, like 22 feet, combined with, the 6th highest driving distance. I mean, that's, he's getting off to such a great start on every hole. And, that's why I think this is just a cool look to kind of look at a little more of a micro approach. Okay, coming in, who's shown in the past that they've been really confident off the tee here. They're still really free to pound driver. And you can kind of see, even look at, a guy like Ben On, who is notoriously wild off the tee. You can see that in the distance from edge of the fairway. And yeah, you got water danger. Some of these holes, the water danger is right on the fairway. A few others, it's a little wider. But I think that mix of, the water plus the thick rough, a lot of guys are going to come in with, clubbing down mindset.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you called it out too. This Thigala number is wild. To me, it's just not, his spray pattern, his distribution off the tee can be, a little bit wild at times. It seems to have had some luck, whether maybe it's the shot shape or, the hole fits his eye, but that's, it jumps out in terms of a guy that doesn't typically pop in distance from the edge of the fairway while still maintaining obviously above average distance off the tee. That is, it's Scotty-esque. I mean, it is It's right in line, which again, this is why Scheffler is the best in the world. He just keeps himself in play without sacrificing distance. And then that second shot, he's, above and beyond everyone else. So this is kind of a really quick, easy way to understand why we are where we are in terms of the state of golf in the odds boards, because he's kind of the best at all of it, really. You can see some other guys too, again, looking at, sorting by driving distance. And I'm just looking at distance from the edge of the fairway at these guys keeping themselves in play. You can see a lot of guys here at the top. Not so much. We know Wyndham, right? That cut can just be a slice at times. It worked for him here last year. You can see here that drifting out a little bit here as well. Ben Griffin lend a rip, paying the price a little bit in terms of distance from the edge of the fairway. It was a little surprising to see Ludwig with a bigger number here, because that's not typically part of his game too. So definitely an interesting way to look at that. But yeah, I mean, it was a good call out by you, because I think it's an interesting way to kind of think about aggressiveness here, because I do think aggressiveness matters. So before we dig into some of the standard stuff we have too, let's look at just apex height. We don't typically look at that. You mentioned it here again, the unique filter and view here on the rabbit hole. Just go back here. We'll look at the last 12 months. Again, like to highlight something that does matter statistically here. That we do have in the rabbit hole that you're not going to be able to find anywhere else in terms of being able to customize it or do, put it through a model or look at it through the lens of the rabbit hole through any filtering.
Now the key thing I love is the ability with these swing metrics, especially ball speed, club head speed, is you can look over a 2-year sample, you can look at a 5-year sample, you can kind of look year by year and kind of see who's making improvements, who's making changes, and you cannot do that anywhere else. And so just another great feature that we have here.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Right? I'm looking at the last 12 months. I think there's probably something to be said by looking at the last, or just maybe going a year and turning into 2025 and just seeing like, okay, who used the offseason to make some gains, right? You can put it in, download it into a CSV if you want, and then you can look at the splits and see who's actually gaining where over, year over year. See who's making short-term changes. That's obviously going to be captured in the last 12-month sample in terms of where they are. It'll flatten it out. But if you want to see who's being more deliberate in trying to make these changes, you can do that as well. But looking at the last 12 months, you can see here from an apex height standpoint, again, thinking about like holding the green, right? So like, a little bit of combination of it's capturing off the tee, but typically you're going to see lower ball flight on your irons as well, your trajectory in. Keegan Bradley, again, a name I've bet here very, very frequently over the years. Ludwig, Benny Ann, Taylor Pendrith, Minwoo Lee, all massive apex height. You can see some corollaries to their ball speed as well, but not not perfect. See Potgeider here as well. Obviously, hits the ball, like a rocket. Minwoo, Rory, Wyndham, Xander. That Xander stuff is just incredible. But you can see here from a apex height, it's not necessarily Xander his thing, but his ball speed, he's getting it out there as well. So anything you want to highlight in here?
Yeah, and one name you mentioned, or we saw in there when you had it to the low people on apex height, is Matt Fitzpatrick was up there, and he's had a lot of success here. And so it is a little bit of a dichotomy this week, because if the wind does blow, you're going to have to flight your ball a little lower. So, I think it's definitely dependent on course conditions. If we get very little wind, obviously the higher apex flight, the better. But I think you'll see some guys like Fitzpatrick in there. We have had some windy years that he's been a part of here, where the lower flight is obviously, kind of judging your ball in the wind there, especially with those long irons. I think that also can come into play. So kind of different ways to look at it. And again, keep monitoring that weather forecast. I think that's something that, and I'll adjust as we go with my own model based on what the weather looks like.
Admittedly, I'm not the golfer that Brian Campbell is, but we are competitive from a ball speed standpoint, and that's just so funny to me that's he's he played well again last week, but he's 162 from a ball speed standpoint is it's very interesting because you're looking at what you're the gap between what you're giving up from most guys living in like the high 170s on average, right? I'm sure obviously Brian Campbell can dial it up probably to 170. I don't know. But in terms of average ball speed, it's pretty wild to see. So, all right, we'll go back to some more of our traditional stuff here. Are we going to pretend like it's going to play difficult, Ron? Like, are we hoping that that we aren't getting a again, PGA National Junior in terms of what we had here. Like, do I have to bring in average scoring conditions in terms of what we would typically look at? Because I don't think we typically would, right? If we think we're getting a normal Bay Hill, I think we would probably just say, let's look at very difficult and difficult.
Yeah, well, and I just sent you the sheet I was talking about. If you want to pull it up here too, just we can verify the course conditions. But yeah, I think right now for me, I'm playing it difficult still. Yeah, there you see. So it's all ryegrass. I'm looking back right now at last year just to see if it was, because I swear I don't remember rye rough
Yeah.
last year.
But again, they
But
said that
maybe I missed.
on the telecast that was something that was new at PGA National was the overseed. It definitely impacted around the green play for sure. Just how it played in the fairway especially with no wind on Thursday. The overseed was something that was uniquely new to PGA National. So maybe it's just something going on there in Florida. These guys are superintendents are talking and they're lining stuff up.
It was the same last year. So I looked on the sheet last year. It's the exact same. So,
Okay.
yeah, so yeah, maybe that's something that was missed, but I know the rough played long and thick last year. I know Scotty had a little better score, but yeah, we'll see what happens. But no, I'm going to hope and trust that it's very difficult this week, and so I'm going to kind of keep that in the rabbit hole. And again, we have so many different filters we can use here: long courses, strong field. So yeah, this is definitely a great modeling week.
Yeah, so we're gonna look long, very long golf courses, difficult, very difficult golf courses. Well, now, so it's a little bit, I would typically want to go to a larger sample, but because this is a signature event field, this is a lot of what these guys play, right? They're not playing shorter golf courses as much. They're not playing, easy, very easy scoring conditions. They're not most of this field, right? You're going to get some of these guys with smaller samples. Obviously Brian Campbell's not going to have a massive sample doing with this. Joe Highsmith's not going to have a massive sample of playing these types of events. But just in terms of the last calendar year, right around 20, 25 rounds played for these guys, you can see, we'll look at the average. It looks like Hideki is on the top here, and we can maybe look at a little bit of a larger sample if we want. No, when we go to strokes gained total and go to average, you can see here Tony Finau at the top. Just again, the ball striking, tee to green play. Fantastic. I mean, you can see bright red on the putting here, but good for Finau. Hideki, Rory, Akshay, Scotty, Ludwig, Cantley, Xander, Russ, Denny, Burns. Real small for Potgieter, obviously, in terms of his difficult golf courses, his reps there. Interesting. I would not expect Scotty to be fifth, and I would not expect Finau to be first in anything that's strokes gained total. I would expect if I'm searching tee to green or ball striking, I would expect maybe a top three Tony.
No, widen that out a bit to 3 years, and I bet you he'll go
he's going to fall
to the top. So
yeah,
he's had maybe Scotty's I wouldn't say a rough start to 2025, but had the injury, but maybe a little rusty. Of course he'll win this week, and there you go. So. Yeah, I think it's probably more of a sample size thing.
Yeah. Scotty, Rory, Xander are your top three. If you go out to 3 years, that makes a lot more sense. Tommy Fleetwood. Yeah. Yep. I mean, look, it's tough, man. I mean, I think he's played well here in the past. He's probably going to play well. Is he winning the golf tournament, right? Like we're looking to bet winners. It's tough. Like he's also a guy for the most part that is like, I don't know if he's going to necessarily give you a sweat, but he's probably somewhat in the mix. And he's going to be flirting with the top 20, but like in a small field event, that's not necessarily paying the bills at all. So he's a tough one. He's a really good golfer. He hits it further than you think. Not a lot of holes in his game. You could see he's really consistent across the board. But he's infuriating in a lot of ways in terms of what it takes to actually close and win golf tournaments. So around the green, you can see here, it kind of jumps out for Vic, as we know. the changes that we saw last year, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if it was last year or within the last handful of years when we had a redesign. We had more shaved runoffs here in the past, and now we have more of the thicker apron around the green. Tour pros will tell you without a doubt, like, it's just more predictable. It takes way more skill to be able to navigate and pick something clean off of the short stuff versus kind of being able to kind of hack it out and get it on within, 10 feet from thick stuff. That mitigates some of the things you would hold against Hovland. Is that correct?
Yeah, they made that change in 2022, and they got rid of a whole lot of the short grass, the aprons, and that kind of filled with rough. And I mean, so that's the thing with Hovland. Like, he's really, to me, he's a true wild card this week because we all know he's had the swing issues, but his ball striking here has been immaculate. Like, if you go back and look over his last 3 trips, last year what killed him was the short game. So he lost 7/10 around the green last year, finished 36th. Year before that, he's top 10. He lost almost a full stroke per round around the green still. So I think even with the, he is a little better. The data shows he is better from thicker rough. He's really struggled here the last 2 years, and that might have even kept him from winning because he literally gained 10 strokes ball striking in 2023 when he finished 10th. And so the year before that, he finished second. Another 9 strokes ball striking he gained, and he was actually positive around the green then. So, I think, depending on what Victor shows up this week, I think he's a really interesting value play, definitely from an outright perspective.
Yeah. What's interesting to Victor is, so I think there's a perception of, we know he's been tinkering in swing changes and swing struggles, but like, it hasn't necessarily played out as much. Like, you can see here, like, we were just looking at obviously the peak here a couple of years ago towards the tail end of, BMW and all that happened at the tail end of what he goes in and, does at, in Atlanta. And then when he goes on and does, Ryder Cup, just playing immaculate golf. Then you see here, the approach stuff is all the ball striking stuff is still really good, right? Last 50, 100 rounds, he's still gaining almost a stroke per round ball striking. Short term, last couple times out, not great. But watching him really closely at the Genesis at Torrey Pines, like, it felt like he was pretty close to being, right on. And then just kind of, had a couple of the blow up holes, similar to what we had with Justin Thomas when Justin Thomas lost it a little bit. It was, just kind of keeping a really big number off the board. You go down here, for the most part, we're still gaining on approach frequently. Struggled a little bit this century, but, Tee Green here, this is all tied to the around the green stuff, which has just been alarming, as we can see here. But otherwise, ball striking approach stuff for the most part has been, still really good. If we want to look here at Bay Hill, we could see to what you're talking about, his history at Arnold Palmer, losing around the green, but he's been in the mix. Obviously the T2, he put it all together there a little bit. T10 here in 2023, but losing a stroke per round around the green. And then obviously as well last year, wasn't really dialed in at all. So it's kind of where we were like waiting for him to be the guy that we thought he was going to be towards the tail end of the year before. And then it never really happened for him. So definitely feels like a spot where it fits his game in terms of long iron play, total driving type of vibe. You could see here, this, and as noted, like, green is good, darker is better because it's in relation to the field. So this is something that just is exceptional in terms of where we are field wise. So he's a tough one to crack. Florida hasn't been great, but again, this is just the last year and a half. Yeah, but you can click any name in the rabbit hole if you're seeing this for the first time, and you can go into any of the metrics and you can, look at the player page and mess around with all this sample size stuff and, get all the conditional breakdowns for the player you like. He's a tough one. The number's big. All right. So this doesn't surprise us. Difficult, very difficult, long courses. Scotty, Rory, Xander. That makes a ton of sense. Let's see. What else should we look at?
Yeah. So there's so many options. So obviously we have the filters for each of the strokes gain metrics. And so this week, off the tee, approach, both very difficult. So if you wanted to look, kind of from a ball striking perspective, similar to what we thought we were going to get back to last week, never happened. So definitely that's something I look at. And then, I mean, look, these are some of the largest greens, 7,500 square feet. So fast Bermuda 3-putt avoidance is going to be huge this week. So again, we could go putting, looking at, large greens, 3-putt avoidance. I think that's something that's, definitely going to be key this week. If you look, par is a good score this week. And so guys who can make those, 5-6 foot, downhill speedy putts, that's kind of what Scotty did. Like, even on tour in general, he was second best last year in birdies, but he's also second best in avoiding bogeys. And, a huge part of that is being able to avoid, those 3 putts when you're kind of scrambling for par. So I think that's just another interesting thing to look at. And then even, we'll see what this says first here.
Well, we'll look at 3-putt in general. Let me back out a little bit, and then I'll add some filtering and see if there's anything that jumps out here. So we'll go last 12 months, excuse me, 3-putt avoidance. And then we can mess around with large greens. We can mess around with fast greens. Max McGreevy, smaller sample than most, but still not nothing. Henley, Xander, Scotty, Seabez, Novak, Denny, Bobby Mack, Jason Day. You get into some other really good putters. You see Morikawa right there as well. You could look at the inverse. Small sample for Isaiah Salinda, but that's not been great. Same thing for Rafael Campos, Cam Young. That makes sense. 3.5%. Yep, that's tough. But let's go and add some.
Yeah,
I'm glad. Fast greens, large greens. What do you think?
Yeah, like I'm glad you mentioned that though, because that's a perfect way to model. Like, just take a 12-month snapshot of just 3-putt avoidance in general, and then you can add in these filters. So I would probably wouldn't add large and fast together. I don't think you get a great sample, but I would just do one at a time. So
okay, let's see what we get here.
We'll see what we get here.
Large, fast. Again, we can manipulate this out a little bit if we wanted to. We'll go last 2 years. You're probably going to get, it looks like 30 rounds or so for guys. And that's the beauty of this, right? You can determine what the sample that makes sense that you think is relevant to what we're doing here. In the last 2 years, in 16 rounds, Xander is not 3-putted on large, fast greens. Neither is Max Gracerman. Keegan, just interesting and surprising a little bit. Hideki too sometimes can, feels like lose concentration. Something happens. Hideki can go sideways with the putter. Harman, Hovland, Jaeger, Bobby Mack. So some names that we saw at the top: McGreevy, Seabez. That's kind of in there as well. You can see Scotty was right there as well. Struggled. Here's where Finau struggles. This is a smaller sample. So if we just go, let's say, large greens, we'll back out and see what that sample is. Then we'll go back in and we'll add fast by itself. See if it makes more sense. Large greens 2 years is probably a real big sample. Yeah, that makes sense. McGreevy, Xander, Dunlap, Hovland, Harman, Henley, Horschel. Keegan's right there again. You can see Jason Day. Rory's in there too. You see the guys that struggle. Some of the same names there in terms of, Finau. Denny, that's kind of surprising to have Denny being towards the tail end of any putting split, which is interesting. Maybe not, just not a great lag putter per se. He just buries putts at a higher rate than anyone else. So that's interesting to see. And if we go back in, I will take off large greens and then we'll put on just fast greens. And we'll see if there's any commonalities to this. And again, you can just simply, if you want to build a model with these things, simply click that little add button right below the tab. You can put it into your mixed condition model right here. And then you can, weigh it as you wish if this is something that you think makes sense. So again, Seabez, Xander again, Jason Day, Novak, Dunlap, Henley, Ben Griffin. So again, that's not bad. Lucas Glover being green on anything putting wise is always a little bit surprising. Gracerman buries putts. Saw that a little bit. He got hot for a little bit there last week at PGA National. Smaller sample for some of these guys that have struggled outside of Eckroat and Finau and Cam Young, Pendrith as well. Hoagie was pretty good in Florida. Hoagie with length is a little bit worrisome, but okay, interesting. And what did you say from a ball striking or approach standpoint? Something you want to look at?
Yeah, just obviously difficult. I would select both difficult categories for approaching off the tee and just kind of view it. Okay, looking at difficult ball striking courses. See what we got this week. Strong
Yeah, we
field.
saw that. And again, hopefully it holds up. This has historically been difficult to gain off the tee, difficult to gain on approach. So we can look at these things. Let's look at them in conjunction and then we'll back out. So gaining off the tee, difficult, very difficult. You can decide if you want to add average to the sample size. Again, we are going based off of historical data, and hopefully it is lining up with how it plays this year. Same thing with approach. So we can look at these both gaining off the tee and approach and ball striking. So who plays well when it is difficult to gain ball striking wise. Currently in the 2-year sample, we can see what we get from a rounds played standpoint. Decent. All right. So in these scenarios, when it is difficult to gain off the tee, Scotty Scheffler, Rory McIlroy, Victor Hovland, Cam Young, Siwoo Kim are your top 5. You can see some other names there just below that. On approach, Scotty number 1 there as well. Now you see where Hoagie jumps in, Siwoo. This is encouraging Siwoo stuff across the board. Obviously, the putting is a problem, but top 5 in both off the tee and approach. It's going to put him in a nice spot. Ball striking wise, you can see Shane Lowry played well last week, not great. Never really was a threat to the top of the leaderboard, but still right in the mix, right around the top 10. See Finau obviously as well. JT, Xander, Morikawa, Connors, Hideki. Now we just search from a ball striking standpoint. So again, difficult, very difficult to gain off the tee. Difficult, very difficult to gain on approach. Combines very difficult ball striking. Scotty, Rory, Siwoo, Morikawa, Hovland, Lowry, Connors, Xander, Cam Young, and Hideki are your top 10. See Ludwig, Henley, JT right outside of that, Cantley as well. And you start to kind of scan over here, see where the putting problems are. It's really, JT has not putted well when the ball striking tests have been difficult, which is kind of why he's not been a factor in, any major or, really any signature event for the most part over the last 2 years. So bad ball strikers in this sample. You want to see, again, smaller sample for Nick Dunlap, but he's at the bottom. Max McGreevy, Harris English. We get some small sample guys in here as well. Again, putting for Denny, not great. On the other sample that we had, and the ball striking is not good either. But again, Denny's a guy that's seems to have added some distance, which is interesting. Just, again, one of those things where you can compare previous years. Not a lot of guys that would be of interest. I know Ben Griffin's been popular of late. This doesn't line up with great Ben Griffin thoughts. So those are some of the names here that kind of are at the bottom.
I'll say this real quick. This is a great time also to use averages because this field is so strong. Like a Ben Griffin might be still above average, but he's still going to rank low.
Yeah.
So that's something I will always check too, even if you don't, include that in your model. But
yeah, Ben Griffin, not
horrible,
but close. But yeah, not horrible, right? So like the bright red, to your point, and that's a great point, is like in relation to the rest of the field, so we're dealing with we're dealing with this, right? We're dealing with
ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, right? And again, like we're getting a small sample for Salinda, but we pull him out, you can start to really see the gap between Scotty and his peers. His peers in the odds board, what we would expect his peers to be on Sunday. We are a stroke and a half per round ball striking better than Rory, Siwoo, Morikawa. Most of these guys, there's only a handful of guys that are even above a stroke, and Scotty is closer to 3 than anyone is to 2. He's closer to 3 than anyone is basically to 2.5 or 1.5. So he's playing a different game.
Yep.
So. All right. Anything else with folks before we wrap?
We don't have to look at it, but I would also say, Rory has often spoken about the importance of the par 5s here, even bringing up how, taking advantage of them is kind of one of the main reasons Tiger won 8 times here, so I think that's definitely something because look, the par 3s and par 4s are among the most difficult. I think they're both in the top 5 most difficult on tour. And so you pretty much have to score on those par 5s. And so, whether you're looking at, I just think overall in general, looking at par 5s, don't need to mess with any difficulty conditions or anything. But I definitely would not forget about that.
Yeah. So a question in the chat. Great question from Albert. When building a model, is it, you're duplicating by having ball striking and tee to green in the model? Yes. Now, I think Ron and I would probably both agree to a degree on this. If you're going to start to have double counting, and you're going to double count somehow, right? When you're messing around with samples, if I'm messing around with a, say a small sample, and I want to look at like strokes gain approach over 12 rounds, 36 rounds, 50 rounds, right? I want to get like recent form, I get a little bit longer form, maybe 2025 form, and then I want to get longer form. You're double counting because that 12 and 24 rounds is also in the 12 rounds is in the 24, 12 and 24 are in the 50. But if you're ever going to be double counting, ball striking approach in particular is probably the place that I think we're all very comfortable having a little bit of double counting, because in terms of its predictability, in terms of what matters almost on any course, it's that ball striking and approach element that tends to be the stickiest. So it is almost impossible to do this without having some, duplicate stats. But, that's why I would go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you could also get creative and just change the filtering. So, for example, you could take ball striking on difficult ball striking courses. You could say, hey, let's look at tee to green on long courses. So you could kind of mix it up and get, obviously use the same data, but it's going to be different filters selected. So it's going to give you different data. So it's just a way to mix it up and get creative.
Correct. And Jay Scoop mentioned too, tee to green is also bringing in around the green. So typically, personally, I like to look at around the green, most, but not every track. Some tracks it matters. I typically like to look at around the green separate. There would be some weeks where I would say I don't look at around the green much, if at all. I typically think I like to look at ball striking more. I think looking at tee to green, where you're simply just filtering out putting versus looking at strokes gain total is useful as well. So it's a good point to know, just in case you don't know. Strokes gain tee to green is everything except putting. Ball striking is just a combination of off the tee and approach. So again, I'm not saying that I'm right by filtering out and looking at around the green separately. It's just typically how I like to do it, because I want to I'm basically bringing in equal weights to around the green, and I don't want to bring in equal weights to around the green compared to what I want to bring into off the tee and approach in most weeks. So, and again, it's double counting. So like the off the tee and approach stuff are in there as well. So it's a great question. But those are the things that I would be comfortable looking at and having some sort of, overlap. You're going to have it typically, depending on how you kind of mess around with your sample stuff. So good question. All right. Par 5 scoring, and then we will wrap. Come back, subscribe, begin Betsperts Golf on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. Andy and I will be here tomorrow. We'll build out a model a little bit, kind of share some of that stuff. Again, if you're not subscribing, take advantage of that. You want to get my model, Ron's model, you can go right here into this view expert ranking section. You can see our guy from the lines, John Hasselbauer, PGA Tout. You can find his model. There's Andy Lack. They have their Bay Hill models up as well. You can see other people, Joe I at Tour Picks, Matt Vicenzi of SI. His models are in here. Again, you want to get a sense of what other people are building too. You get all the ability to do this too. If you don't have time, or you kind of want to get a sense of how to start to do this on your own, your best bet is to poke around, look at a bunch of other models that people are doing, and you can start to see how other people go about the process. Along with these shows, we hopefully can help you become more independent in building those as well. If you just kind of want to do it, wisdom of the crowd, you can go into any of these, download it into a CSV if you're comfortable in Excel, and then weigh them differently, combine them, and kind of get a wisdom of the crowd model if that's your thing too, if you're well versed in Excel. We're going to look at par 5 scoring here before we wrap. We're not going to do any filtering, but then we can look at filtering if we want. We're pressed for time though. We have a meeting every Friday, Monday right after this, and we're always late. So shame on Ron and I. But hey, meeting doesn't start without us anyway. We are the meeting. All right, par 5, last 12 months. No filtering, just average par 5 scoring. And then we can look at birdie or better rates. Getting into some more par 5 and filtering stats coming in here soon. Max McGreevy. You can see Taylor Pendrith, Billy Horschel, Joel Highsmith. Welcome to the fields. Patrick Cantley, Max Gracerman, Scotty Scheffler. Just your average par 5 scoring. You want to look at birdie rates. McGreevy as well. Gracerman. Again, solid putters for the most part. Adam Scott, Highsmith, Cantley, Pendrith, Siwoo. Which is interesting. Siwoo's the ball striking stuff was interesting to see. Scotty, Minwoo Lee, Cam Davis. Again, Tony doesn't make a lot of putts, but ball striking so good he puts himself in position to take advantage in these par fives. The scoring opportunities here are important. Looking at the back end, again, some small sample stuff. Seabass, Harmon, Pavon, Denny, Nick Taylor, Homa, Harris English, some guys that have struggled on par 5 scoring. Zalatoris, we just know Zalatoris plays really good strategic golf. He does not put himself in difficult positions, but he also doesn't flag hunt very often either, right? So, that's why we like Zalatoris historically when it's a tough test, but when you don't have to score super low, just because he plays where he's a decade golf guy. If anyone knows about decade golf and strategy around having to kind of plot around the course and take trouble out of there. So interesting. All right, Ron. Anything else for the folks before we wrap?
No, I think we gave the people a lot to look at this week. So go crazy in the rabbit hole. Share with a friend. Looking forward to the best field of the year so far.
Yep. And I think it's a fair question. Is to Scotty or not to Scotty? And then it becomes you just slide down the board one spot and then you go to Rory or not to Rory. And then otherwise it opens up, I think, a whole chain of events because the way that both guys are playing, they're fit for both. It's tough. I know a lot of people don't like to go to the top of the board under any scenario. And, that's why people get so mad at Scotty last year. It's like, hey, you can bet on him. I know you're not going to win as much or it's a very expensive ticket, but it is an option. So you can bet on Scotty or Rory this week instead of getting just mad that they're going to be competitive and those prices are short. They are an option. You can click that name and you can bet on it. So again, come back on Tuesday for the betting show. Again, that is going to be 11 a.m. Eastern. And then betspertsgolf.com. You can head over there right now, read Ron's preview, mess around with the rabbit hole, look at the course sheet as we showed you, and do your own stuff. So appreciate it. Hit that like and subscribe before you take off. Thanks, everyone.